Welcome back. Tonight we look back on a life in branding, and who better than Jeremy Sampson to also outline the trends taking us into 2015. Sampson recently announced he would be stepping down from Interbrand Sampson de Villiers, which emerged from a company he founded 41 years ago. In 1973, he launched the country's first professional branding consultancy, which began as the Thinking Man's design agency. In 1992, he was approached by Interbrand, the world's leading strategic branding consultancy, to merge and take that brand into Africa. Sampson has been involved with leading brands here, including SABC, Nedbank, the Springboks, Sasol, ABSA, ACSA, Standard Bank, Coca Cola, MTN, and many more. He has won more than 100 branding and creative awards. He joins us in studio now. Great to have you.
Thanks, Francis.
So, do you feel a bit old when Doug de Villiers calls you the original brander in Africa?
I feel very old, and then when people refer to me as the grandfather or the godfather of branding, I feel even older.
Is it an honour as well?
Oh, it's absolutely humbling, and yes, it is an honour as well.
Yeah.
Because when you think back in about 1973, you had design agencies and you had ad agencies, but not really branding agencies. That's only emerged over the last few decades. That's why we used to joke we were the Thinking Man's design company.
Well, it's the Thinking Man's design agency, which I don't think that name would fly today. Is that a sign of how we've changed?
I think it's one of the signs. You know, as you say, things that you could say 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, which were absolutely acceptable, aren't acceptable today.
Yeah.
And that's one of the key things, that as things evolve, you have to evolve with them. It's what brands have to do. You know, the brands that have longevity have kept adapting and staying relevant.
Yeah.
And that's quite a challenge.
So take us back to 1973. The branding landscape, you say professional branding houses, that was unheard of at the time. But just look at brands themselves, the landscape then, and how it compares to now. And were there slow changes? Was there anything radical for you that happened over those years?
I guess going back 40 odd years ago, most brands were from the fast moving consumer goods, FMCG. And FMCG is actual consumer brands. Things like corporate brands were poo-pooed by a lot of people, especially the ad agencies. And now things have changed dramatically. We started off doing a lot of annual report work for people like Nedbank in those days, which had just changed from Netherlands Bank, and no one forgets its roots going back that far, and doing a lot of annual reports, but doing a lot of designs of logos, etc., and doing all sorts of different bits and pieces. So then it grew into especially the corporate side. Now today, of course, the corporate side is huge.
Yeah.
And often you talk more about reputation than the brand as well. So these are areas where it's changed dramatically. But today, everything is brandable. You know, this TV channel is brandable. You as a person are. The country is. And this is where branding has really changed our lives, and we're so conscious, and everything is competing. Even Johannesburg competes against Cape Town. I know it doesn't have the mountain, but it has other things as well. And this is where people sometimes smile about it, but you are in competition. And where you have marketing involved, that competition can be actually improved or decreased. And the more you have a strong brand, the better it will become.
That's so interesting, because I was in America recently, and just watching how towns brand themselves, and how regions, and it's competitive, but I think it raises, it uplifts everybody, in fact.
Well, you're exactly right.
Do you think we need more of that here?
I think we're going to see more of that. You know, talking to colleagues in London, they're doing a lot of branding of shopping centres. And yes, we were badging shopping centres 20, 30 years ago, but now they're becoming brands because shopping centres are competing. Now, in Johannesburg, do you go to the new Rosebank, or you still go to Sandton or Hyde Park or whatever, or you southern suburbs? So people are competing for our share of wallet, for consumer spend, and that's where everything is competitive, and that's where branding can give you the edge if it's used properly.
Like you say, though, everything is brandable nowadays. We talk about personal brands, countries, and it also relates to almost everything that a company does and says, because it's not about the logo, it's what that evokes and how people interact with you. But has it become too big of a term that it's almost lost a bit of meaning?
I think you make a very good point. You know, 10, 20 years ago, people thought about designer things, and designer became ubiquitous, and lost its meaning a bit. I think brand, everyone talks about brands. Not everything is a brand, or you can have small brands or big brands. So this is where it's a term that's being used perhaps too much. There are lots of badges, but that doesn't make it into a company. And this is where the company brand, the product brands, the service brands, the people, the countries, all of them have to be brandable. But not many are, and not many succeed, and some, of course, die off.
I saw some analysis that you wrote a while ago about old brands and how they do seem to have... It takes a while for them to build up, but then they have staying power. It's hard for other brands to come and take them off the top spot pretty easily. Just tell me, is that changing in this fast world, or do you still need patience to build up a brand?
It does, but it's already generalizing too much. Coca Cola is 127 odd years old. Facebook is, whatever it is, 11 or 12. Google is only 17. Depends on the sector you're in. IT is moving so fast, social media is moving so fast, brands are coming and going. Other sectors, like perhaps engineering, cold drinks or whatever, is slower. Alcoholic beverages, a lot of people want heritage. They want brands that go back perhaps 100 or so years. But you've got to stay relevant. It is so competitive. If you don't stay relative, you're going to lose your consumer. And that's perhaps one of the magical things about a Coca-Cola. It stays relevant. Whether you love it or hate it, it's still there, it's still young, and it's resonating with South Africans, through their rainbow campaign and that sort of thing.
They do. They tap into to something. Maybe in IT then, or those high-tech sectors, is there a danger that we could see brands dropping off? Because it never used to happen then. Nokia, Kodak gone. And I do wonder if people could one day just get sick of Facebook. Something new happens, and there's a huge exodus when it does happen.
Again, I think you're absolutely right. I think it was someone did a chart showing once you became listed on the New York Stock Exchange, how long did it take you to get to a certain figure? Now, we know that at the moment, Apple is the most valuable company in the world, but it's happening in a shorter and shorter period. For a time, I think it was IBM, or it might have been General Electric. Those are both companies that go back to the turn of the last century, the early 1900s. But that's no guarantee of a future. As you've just mentioned, Nokia, which went back to about 1860, has gone. And who would have thought that even 5 years ago? So even though you can be a strong brand, whether it's patient and investment, it's no guarantee that you have a future.
Let's talk about memories again. Doug de Villiers again was talking about your involvement with the Springbok logo and the way it jumps. Was that detail important?
Well, people forget that the Springbok logo goes back to the early 1900s, and it had evolved slowly, always going from left to right. And then there came a time when South Africa was going through change, and SAFU and Dr. Louis Later, we were working with, said, we've got to change it. We've got to mark that things are moving ahead. And I said, well, that's a bit tricky because registering trademarks around the world are very expensive things. And when you actually look at the rugby playing world, it's America, Australasia, it's Europe. And then we turned around and said, well, a simple solution is just flip it. And we flipped it, we tidied it up just a little bit. But this is where a lot of great brands, and I think the Springbok is a great brand, just evolve. Sometimes the change is so subtle. Now, obviously, changing it to a different direction isn't that subtle, but for the rest of it, not too much change.
So you keep the legacy, but show that something is different. And how did you feel when Mandela put on that Springbok shirt? And people say he really understood symbolism, which I guess is linked to branding.
Well, I think this is where that man was an absolute giant, and he understood things, and the way he stood there wearing that Springbok jersey and the Springbok hat, absolutely incredible. But this is where a lot of people still don't get it. He understood straight away, he understood the symbolism, and obviously a key aspect then and now still is to bring the country together. And that's what he understood so well, and that was part of his magic.
When you look back, you've been involved in a lot of campaigns. What stands out to you? What are you most proud of?
There are so many and so many different stories one could tell. I think the rebranding of the city of Johannesburg, which we did around about the year 2000.
And that was the world-class African city?
That was before that. Okay. That came a little bit later. Okay. But where Mandy Jean Woods was in charge of communications, and we had to go into the council chamber. We had to present to the councillors. The mayor himself was there. talking about making Joburg one unit, because Joburg already was absorbing Soweto, and since then it's got even bigger. So this was making it into a brand. And as we were saying earlier, this is where cities, areas are brandable, but it was quite a challenge. And one of the big challenges, of course, was that we had to go through a tender process. I think we won about 3 tenders in a row, and then we were told you can't win another tender. So the job wasn't completed. We did a certain amount, the strategy, working on the name, working on the logo, working on some of the applications, and then they chopped it off.
Oh, what a pity. And I guess just generally, it's a collaboration between you and the client, and that's got to work for you to get your job done.
Well, absolutely. At the same time, we were doing the University of Joburg merger, where we had Wits Technikon and Rao, and we were working with the 2 vice-chancellors, but Professor Roy Marcus was the person who tried to pull it all together. But again, presenting to, I don't know, I think it was about 40 professors, heads of department, who all had a viewpoint. And you may remember we had the 2 hupus coming together, and you had the empty pages of a book. And the big debate was, well, what are you going to put in the book? And we said, nothing. They wanted to put some Latin writing in, like you see in Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard. And we said, no, we want students to come here with an open mind, and you will populate those pages. And in the end, we won. But without Roy Marcus, it would never have happened.
We've got that picture there. Beautiful story. So let's look back on this year. There's always hits and misses. Cell C, a definite miss. What else stands out to you? We were talking about HATER, perhaps.
I think HATER is sad because that was something we worked with Telkom closely on strategy, helped create the name, the visual identity and the look, and I think to begin with very successful. But this is where business decisions impact marketing and branding, etc. I find it interesting that if you look at someone like British Telecom, they went into mobile, then they pulled out, now they're coming back in again. And I often wonder what will happen at Telkom if we look 5-10 years hence. What will happen? Because at the moment there's so much rumour mongering about, right, we've got Vodacom and MTN, but what's going to happen to Cell C? Is there going to be something else happening? Is there going to be an HATER coming back, or will it be Telkom Mobile as it is at the moment? So this is where you just don't know what's going on. But it's a very vibrant area and very, very exciting.
Interesting times. Going forward, do we need brands? Do you think there could be a change? I went to Berlin once, and I was just thinking that people dress so badly. And I've since learned that there's quite a strong anti-brand movement. Young people are saying, I don't want to wear brands. Is that very siloed? Could we see a backlash?
Well, there'll always be someone. Go back, 15 years ago, and Naomi Klein wrote her famous book, No Logo. And reading an interview with her in the FT, I think it was this weekend, was quite interesting. And there'll always be some people who say, no, brands are too powerful, logos are too powerful. But brands become powerful because of the way they're managed. Gillette dominates, 70% of the world, which is quite amazing. And it's not just a male brand anymore, it's become a male and a female brand. So this is where things can evolve. Some brands won't have a future, and the sectors will change, and styles will change, and cultures will change. But as you say, you go to a place like Berlin, it's very, very different. I remember walking through the Brandenburg Gate, and it was actually so exciting to think I'd walk through the Brandenburg Gate. But isn't that silly? But yet that symbolism, and when you see the chariot on the top of it, it's very exciting.
What do you think, as South Africa, we are missing as a brand?
I think at the moment we're going through some turbulent times. We're a young brand, 20-odd years old, and it's difficult times. A lot of people say that when you look at the countries in Africa and growth rates of 9, 8, 7%, and we're struggling to get over 1. And that is an indictment, I think, of the leadership of the country and getting the country together. This is where we're going through those turbulent times and things need to settle down. But whether it's Labour, whether it's the politicians, whether it's the business leaders, they have to come together to make the country better for all of us. And at the moment, I think we're lacking a little bit of leadership there.
Now, for you, now that you've stepped back, do you remain in South Africa? Do you remain very involved in our wine industry, which possibly needs branding, like you say, because it's so wonderful. The world needs to know. Just tell me what's in store for you.
Well, the first thing is I stay involved with Interbrand and still involved with them part of my time and acting as an advisor and consultant there. And that's absolutely great, and that connects me as well with what's going on around the world of branding, as after all Interbrand's in 40-odd countries. But then it frees me up from day-to-day things to look at other interests. And yes, wine is an interest, and I think it needs a lot of help, and it needs some strong brands. When you start talking about, is it 2,300 different estates? I was down in the Cape last week and I visited a lot of those estates. Someone couldn't believe that I visited 9 estates and I didn't have a single glass of wine. But just looking, and it was business. I was looking to see what was going on and happening, and almost doing a mini audit into each place I went. And there are lots of opportunities.
Well, I hope you get to enjoy many more glasses, and thank you for joining us tonight. That was Jeremy Sampson, who's resigned but not retired. He's the founder of Interbrand Sampson de Villiers.